I am delighted, and there's loads of people streaming in already, Romy. It's lovely. There's quite a lot of people obviously taking some time out of their busy day. I think this is a subject that is so potentially misunderstood, but people are really interested in, and we like to have the very best of guests on the show.
Oh,
And
thank you.
today I'm really delighted to invite Romy Worthington. I'm not going to tell you too much about Romy because I'm sure she's got a story. The only thing we did work out at the beginning of the while we are having a little chat is Romy's our youngest guest, so we are definitely diversifying in our youth profile. So I'm going to hand it straight over to you, Romy. I'm so proud and pleased that you're here today.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, take us away. Take us into the world of Tourette syndrome.
Thank you so much for having me. So today, of course, I'm going to be talking to you all about Tourette syndrome. It's a very misunderstood neurological condition, but I hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll have a deeper understanding of it. So the first thing I do have to say is that there are many different stereotypes surrounding Tourette syndrome, but the main one that you probably would have heard is a lot of people think that it's just about swearing. And although that is a possible tic, there are also many other tics. It's thought that around 10 to 15% of people with Tourette's have swearing tics. But it's also important to note that those of us who do have those tics, it isn't as fun as the media makes it out to be. It can actually be very socially isolating. Hey! And people can sadly have negative attitudes towards it. But I think it's very important to note that it's not part of a person's personality. If we tick something inappropriate, it's not who we are. So I just wanted to clear that up first. Hello, woo-hoo. But today I'm going to be talking a bit about the different types of tics, because tics are the primary symptom of Tourette syndrome. To be diagnosed with Tourette's, you need at least two motor tics and one vocal tic for over a year. So we're going to be talking about the different types of tics, but also co-occurring conditions, because Tourette syndrome often doesn't just occur on its own. Hello, woo-hoo. And we're also going to be talking about how Tourette's impacts daily life and how to support people with the condition. But please feel free to leave at any time, and you definitely don't have to take part in every discussion if you don't feel comfortable. It's about whatever works for you. So, woo-hoo, you're probably wondering, who am I and why am I here? So I'm a 21-year-old called Romy, and I have Tourette syndrome. I've been doing disability advocacy since I was 12 years old, and I did a TEDx talk last year about neurodiversity. But I'm here today to really shed light on Tourette's, because that's one of the main conditions that I raise awareness of and that I talk about, because it's one of the most misunderstood. Beans! That's a tick. So my experience with Tourette syndrome really is that at the age of 8, tics and OCD overtook my life. I did have some mild traits before then, but that's really when I classed the onset as, because that's when it became a real big issue. Hello, woohoo! And unfortunately at that time, I wasn't able to dress myself, walk upstairs in my home, or walk over certain areas of the floor. And I was pretty much a social outcast as well, because of course, people don't tend to understand why someone is making repetitive noises or why someone is doing strange movements. So I was bullied, but thankfully most people were actually very understanding and supportive. So I was very grateful for that. But it technically took me a long time to get the formal diagnosis of Tourette's. It wasn't until I was 15 that it was actually put down in my medical records, because the doctors I saw before that didn't really have the understanding. Because again, it's a complex condition and there is a lack of awareness of it. But at the age of 15, I finally got the formal diagnosis of Tourette's, but I knew I had it before then. So I'm just going to cover some basic facts about tics right now. They can be uncontrollable movements and vocalizations. Woo-hoo! I think that was an example. And tics, I think it's important to note, they can be split into simple and complex. So I think, beans. Sorry. Some tics are things that might not be noticed. I think is something that a lot of people don't realize. A lot of the time, Tourette's isn't obvious. The tics may be so subtle that you might just think someone's fidgeting, or that they're just doing typical gestures. But even simple tics can have a huge effect on someone. And pretty much anything that the body can do can be a tic. Hey, it's something that is so individual. So, two people with Tourette's will have totally different tics, and some can be very random, very complex as well. And they do change over time usually. So the tics we have in the beginning of our Tourette's journey, they can go away and they will likely be replaced by new tics. And some tics are sort of a one-off, and then others are sort of repetitive and they can happen again and again over years. But when we first develop the tic, we don't actually know if it's going to be a one-off or it's one that lasts. There's a lot of uncertainty with that. Hello. I think it's also interesting that Tourette's isn't the only condition that causes tics. A lot of people do assume that Tourette's is the same as tics, but tics are the symptom. And there are other conditions that can cause tics, like functional neurological disorder, PANS, chronic motor tic disorder, which in basic terms is where you have just motor tics for over a year, chronic vocal tic disorder, which again, the opposite is where you have just vocal tics for over a year. And then there's provisional tic disorder, which is, I'm a chicken, not that, which is just where you have motor and vocal tics for under a year, because to be diagnosed with Tourette's, you need it for over a year. So as I said, tics can be simple or complex, and I've just got some examples here. Hello, simple motor tics, things like hard blinking, eyebrow raising, jaw clicking. They can go unnoticed, but they can still have a huge impact. For example, if you're trying to read something and you're constantly hard blinking or eye rolling, that can make things take quite a long time when you're trying to read and focus on things. And then more complex motor tics, can include pretty much anything, but kicking objects, falling to the ground, even peeing oneself. That's a bladder tic. They are not nice. And there's just many different ones. Copying other people's movements, that's called echopraxia. That's a possible one as well. And then again, we've got, the simple vocal tics, which can be things like squeaking and throat clearing, clicking your tongue, and making animal noises. And then there's the complex ones, which are saying contextual phrases. Those tics that are in context, again, it's not really what we're thinking. It's more just, it's triggered by things around us, like sort of how an intrusive thought is what you don't want to think. Those contextual phrases might sometimes be what you don't want to say, which can be inconvenient in social situations, I must say. And also mimicking what other people say and like copying what other people say, that's called echolalia. Also, even doing different accents can be a complex vocal tic. My tics do some very interesting accents, usually pretty badly though. But yeah, screaming, singing, there's a lot of different ones, as I said. Pretty much anything could be a tic. Hello! And as I was just touching upon, we often don't mean what we tic because it is like an intrusive thought that comes out. Sometimes it's just what we least want to say. And that's why I say that my tics are like an annoying 3-year-old, because they will constantly say what I don't want to say. So tics often aren't what we mean, and they can be situational and one-off, but they're just triggered by surroundings and not actually what we're really thinking. So it's really important to try not to be offended because we really don't mean it. If we do tic something inappropriate, then it's not what we want to tic. It's not what we want to say. It just happens. So it's important to be quite reassuring and try not to be offended by it because we don't mean it. Okay, so I did say at the beginning of this that Tourette's can co-occur with other conditions, and it's about 85% or more of people with Tourette's actually have another condition alongside it. It's surprisingly rare for Tourette's to occur on its own. So it's thought that more than half of people with Tourette's have ADHD. And it's thought that up to 60% of people with Tourette syndrome have OCD. And I'm going to quickly just add in there, OCD isn't what a lot of people think it is. It's not being neat. It's not being perfectionistic. It's a condition that causes involuntary, horrific thoughts and sometimes hours worth of compulsions. It's a very debilitating condition. So the triad of having Tourette's, OCD, and ADHD is pretty common. But again, not everyone has all three conditions. Sometimes there are other things in there like anxiety. Autism can co-occur with Tourette's as well. So it's different for everybody, but OCD and ADHD are seen as the primary co-occurring conditions that are the most common with Tourette's. But sensory processing difficulties, executive dysfunction, disinhibition, social immaturity, rage attacks and struggles with anxiety are also common in people with Tourette's. So a lot of people do say that tics are just the tip of the iceberg, because we often do have a lot of other traits as well that contribute, and sometimes the co-occurring conditions can actually impact us more than the tics. So that's always important to bear in mind when you're with someone with Tourette's. They're probably struggling in ways that you don't see as well. Hey, so can people hold in their tics? I think this is really important. Some people can temporarily hold in their tics, the same as you would hold in a cough or hold in a sneeze, or if you were having a staring contest, it's the same as trying not to blink. But the problem is that this shouldn't be encouraged, because if a person is holding in their tics and trying to forcefully stop themselves from ticking, it takes up so much focus that the person probably isn't going to be able to focus on anything else. If they're in a classroom and trying not to tick, that's going to be the only thing that they're focusing on. They're not going to be taking anything in. Hello. And a lot of people also report that holding in their tics can make issues worse later on. They might come out worse later on, the tics, or it may trigger anxiety or other symptoms like rage attacks, which are involuntary outbursts of anger, but they're not a reflection of someone's personality. They are involuntary. But yeah, that's why you shouldn't ask someone with Tourette's to just stop ticking, or you shouldn't pressure them to hold in their tics, because it does just accumulate. We often get a very, very, very uncomfortable sensation before a tic, and that's something that's invisible. People don't see it. Hello, but it does feel very uncomfortable, and that's why you shouldn't encourage people to hold in their tics. So how should you react? Hello. Well, sometimes tics can get worse if they're paid attention to. So some people just find it helpful if you ignore the tics and just act like they're not happening. And most people with Tourette's don't usually mind if you laugh with them, not at them. But for example, if we take something funny, it would be kind of awkward if people didn't laugh. So a lot of us don't seem to mind people laughing along with us if we find a tic funny. It can just ease the tension, really. But also refrain from making comments like, think of how the other person feels, because those of us with Tourette's, we know that our tics can bother other people sometimes, but we can't control it. So don't try and make us feel guilty for something we can't control, because that doesn't solve the issue. We still can't control it. And it just makes people very self-conscious of their tics if people say things like that. But most importantly, if you want to know how to react to a person's tics, just ask the individual, because everyone with Tourette's is very different, and everyone with Tourette's will have their own preferences as to how they want people to react to it. So, hello. I decided to include in this some struggles that people with Tourette syndrome may face in the workplace, because it can be a struggle. One issue that's often faced by people with Tourette's in the workplace is stress. Because although Tourette syndrome isn't caused by stress, it's a genetic condition, the stress can make the tics worse. So general workplace stress can exacerbate the tics and make things worse. And also, some people may worry that they're an inconvenience to their co-workers. They might worry that they're distracting them. So that can cause a lot of anxiety as well in the workplace, which ironically, the anxiety then makes the tics even worse. And as well, tics just make it difficult to perform daily tasks. Like, as I said, reading can be difficult when you have eye-rolling tics. Writing can be hard as well, because a person may have tics where they sort of stab the page. That's a tic I've had. Or, they might jerk their hand when they're writing. It can make writing quite difficult. Even traveling to and from work can be daunting, because people might worry, like, how are others going to react? And that can lead to a lot of anxiety getting to work, which then might come out as more tics when the person is at work. So here are some possible accommodations for Tourettic individuals. Remote working can be very beneficial for some people, because that would get rid of the stress of having to travel to work. But also, it's just easier for some people. It allows people to accommodate themselves more if they work remotely, and people might feel less anxious at home than they would in an actual office or something. So remote working can be a good option for some people, but also a person shouldn't be told you have to work remotely, because that would be discriminatory. It has to be an individual's choice, of course, but that's, if somebody finds it easier to work remotely, then that is a possible accommodation for them. And flexible hours can be helpful for some people as well. Hello, because as I said, it can be very stressful and the stress ironically makes the tics worse. So if we have reduced hours sometimes, that might reduce the stress and therefore reduce the tics. But also, if we're having a particularly bad tic day where we're really struggling to work, we might struggle to type because we're moving around so much, then the flexible working hours can be helpful because then we can take a break when we need to and go back to it when we can. Hello. Text to speech might be helpful because, as I said, some people might have struggles reading. So having something read out to them, that might be helpful and can help people take things in quicker. But also speech to text, because if a person's struggling to type, for example, due to tics where they might smash on the laptop or type the wrong thing, then that could be helpful as well to get things down. Having people in the workplace educated on Tourette's, I'd say, is one of the most important things, though, because that prevents people from worrying, what are people thinking? If people are educated, then, the person knows that they're not going to be judged as much. And allowing the person to have breaks can be helpful because, as I said, if they're having a very bad tic episode where they can't work on anything, they might need to take a break because that might be the only thing that reduces the tics, is having a break like that. Hello. Woohoo. For example, a while back now, when I was remote working, I would still need breaks because sometimes I would just have tic attacks where I'd sort of fall to the floor and start rolling about on the floor because my tics were so severe. And of course, I'd need a break because you can't work whilst rolling around on the floor. So breaks can be really important for some people. Hello. A private office area can be helpful too if a person isn't working from home because, hey, then if a person's having a really bad tic episode, they can just go there or just work there so that they don't worry about whether they're bothering other people, because anxiety can be really horrible. And as I said, sensory processing issues, just like sensory processing issues are common in autistic people, they are also common in people with Tourette's. And sometimes sensory overload may make tics worse. So having things like the permission to just wear sunglasses or ear defenders at work can be very helpful. And something as simple as that can really help people, because when I wear sunglasses, it helps massively. Little things like that can make a huge difference as well. And when it comes to daily life outside of work, unfortunately, Tourette's can impact that a lot too. And I feel that this is really important to cover because I know a lot of people who say they wish they had Tourette's, which is a massive pet peeve of mine when people say that, because a lot of people don't realize that it affects so many different things. It isn't just yelling funny things, it does have a massive impact. So, for example, certain tics like clapping your hands can make it hard to do up buttons or even shoelaces because you're trying to do them up and then just uncontrollable clapping. I used to do that a lot. It was very frustrating. Everything took 3 times as long. Even walking can be hard for some people. Some people with Tourette syndrome have mobility issues due to their tics. They might have tics where they fall to the ground, or they might have tics where they sort of kick their legs out and they might fall over a lot. So I know some people who use a wheelchair due to their Tourette's. I use a wheelchair, but not due to Tourette's, due to another issue, which is co-occurring. Some people actually have a wheelchair due to the tics and the impact that they have. And even things as simple as eating can be really hard, because if a person has a tic where they spit food out, that's inconvenient. That was one of my first tics, actually. Also, throat tics can make someone feel like they're going to choke, which can make eating difficult as well. And that's something that a lot of people don't think of. And relationships can be difficult, not just romantic relationships, but just general relationships, acquaintances, friends, because the person might worry. There's a constant worry. How are people going to react if I tic this? What's going to happen if I have a tic attack or something? And that's why it's just really important to have the people around the individual be understanding and be educated on it. Sleeping as well. It's a massive struggle for a lot of people with Tourette's. It's said that around 80% of people with Tourette syndrome have sleeping difficulties, and partially that is because ticking, moving so much, does make it difficult to fall asleep in the first place, but also co-occurring difficulties as well. OCD and ADHD can also contribute to sleep problems. For example, horrible intrusive thoughts with OCD cause a lot of anxiety and make it very difficult to sleep. Hyperactivity associated with ADHD can make it difficult to sleep as well. Some people actually tic in their sleep. That's not spoken about very much, but some people do experience tics in their sleep, which then wake them up in the middle of the night, which is, again, very inconvenient and makes people very, very tired. Some people with Tourette's will seem quite tired. It might be due to sleep issues, but it can also be due to medication used to manage Tourette's that often causes as well. Not a good mix, I must say. And even talking, thankfully I don't have as much issue with this, as you can tell, because I don't stop talking. But some people with Tourette syndrome, their vocal tics are so frequent that they may keep interrupting themselves when they're trying to speak, and that can be very frustrating. But also stuttering tics are a thing as well, where a person might repeat the first syllables of what they're trying to say. I've had that before, and again, it's very irritating for me to have that, but thankfully I haven't had that tic in a while. And I've spoken a lot about the difficulties that people with Tourette syndrome face, and it is important to be aware of the difficulties, because you have to be aware of the struggles in order to know how to accommodate someone. But I did also want to cover some of the strengths, because I feel like I'm just saying bad, this is bad, this is bad. I want to focus on some of the strengths as well. And one strength that I've noticed a lot being around others with Tourette's is that when we're absorbed in something, when we're focused, we often tic less. And I've seen this a lot with people focus on music. They might tic less when they're playing a musical instrument or singing. Some people experience it when they're making something artistic. Some people experience it when they're playing sport. And I think that it's also said that some people with Tourette syndrome are actually gifted when it comes to creativity. And I think partially that's because this focus can give a temporary respite from the tics. So people can focus on this so much that it really becomes an area of expertise in a way. And there are many famous people with Tourette's as well, such as Lewis Capaldi, Billie Eilish, even Amadeus Mozart was thought to have Tourette's. Howie Mandel, Dan Aykroyd, and some sources even say David Beckham may have Tourette's. But Lewis Capaldi and Billie Eilish are the ones who are really most open about it right now. And this just shows that people with Tourette syndrome can be successful. And even people who aren't famous can be very successful. Just the fact that we're happy, we can advocate for ourselves, that's success. You don't have to be famous to be successful. So there's a lot of successful people with Tourette's out there, even if they're not famous. And interestingly, a 2016 study said that people with Tourette syndrome may have faster grammatical composition. I clearly don't, because I just said that wrong. But supposedly some people with Tourette syndrome do. And that's interesting, actually, because I know with some tics, it has to be done in a way that satisfies the premonitory urge, the physical sensation that comes before a tic. And it's interesting because sometimes it has to contain a certain amount of syllables, or sometimes it has to contain a certain syllable in order to fulfill that urge. And I think in a way that might be why some people with TS have faster grammatical composition, because it's definitely helped me in terms of my poetry writing. So here are some ways to help people with Tourette's. Number one is know that tics are a neurological symptom like tremors or seizures and not a choice. And I want to make this point clear, because some people mistake it for a behavioral problem and think that you can just discipline out someone's tics, but that really isn't going to work. That will only cause low self-esteem and will make a person harmfully suppress and be very uncomfortable and become unable to focus. So I think it's important to point out that it's a neurological symptom, just like tremors or seizures. They are involuntary, even though they can temporarily be held in. That's not advisable. They will always come out eventually. And know that ticking a swear word is really no different to ticking the word cabbage or floorboard. Because as I said, swearing tics, or any tic, they don't have intentions behind them. They're not something we're really choosing to say. They're neurologically misfired signals. So they're really meaningless as it is. That's why when people say, oh, people with Tourette's shouldn't be around kids, I think it's important to explain to kids that this person can't help it, and the tics don't really mean anything. It's just random signals, really. And therefore, they don't really mean anything. And again, know that tics aren't really what a person's thinking. And it's important to know that, sadly, people with Tourette's do often feel anxious in social situations just because of how we're sometimes treated. Sometimes people do make comments and stare. So it can be helpful if you reassure the person and just make sure they know that you're there for them, because going out in public can be daunting when you have Tourette's. And I think it's also important to note that you should give people with Tourette's the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities, because we're often just turned down because people assume that we can't do things, or that we're a liability, or that we're just going to be disruptive. But we are just like anybody else. We have gifts, we have talents, we have so many things we can give. And I think we need to be given a chance, because I remember when I was 14, I was on a work placement. I got fired after 2 days because I couldn't deal with my tics anymore. And that shouldn't happen. It should be that we're given a chance to demonstrate what we can do. And as I said, don't tell someone to stop ticking or to tick quietly, because if we could do it quietly, if we didn't do our vocal tics so loudly, if we had a choice, we wouldn't do them that loudly. But unfortunately, they don't really have volume control. It would be very good if they did, but they don't. But also, if you tell people to stop ticking, not only does that make them feel like they have to suppress, which is harmful because they can't focus and they experience a lot of discomfort. It causes the individual to feel very frustrated at themselves and can make the person feel like an inconvenience, which is never how you want to make someone feel. Hello, woohoo! When we tick, it can be helpful if you just continue talking rather than pausing, because if you pause every time we tick, then we might, if you pause every single time we tick, then we might feel like we're being really disruptive or that we're slowing things down. But if you kind of speak over the ticks and just act sometimes like they're not there, then it can just show that you're acknowledging us more than the ticks. And that can be reassuring to us as well. And there we are. Oh dear. There we are. So that's really what I wanted to say about Tourette's. I feel like I've still got a bit of time here. But are people allowed to ask questions? Oh wait, there's a chat. Why have I just realised there's a chat?
That's absolutely. I've been managing a chat in the background, and people are absolutely allowed. If you finish, Romy, that's fine. If you've got something else to say, we've still got 10 minutes left, so it's entirely up to you. If you want to go for questions, or if you want anything else to add, I've got loads of things to say.
I'm very happy to answer questions. I really want to hear what people have to say and answer any questions, because I feel like I've been rambling.
There isn't that many questions that are coming through just yet, but obviously we hopefully people would put their questions into the chat if they can. From my perspective, well, I'll come on camera. There you go. Then you won't feel so lonely. I Tourettic individuals. I thought I knew a lot about Tourette's. I clearly don't, by the way. I probably knew 10% of what you talked about today, which was just fantastic. But I love Tourettic individuals. People have been asking about the recording of this session. As soon as Shezzy gets around to editing it, we'll send it out to everyone as well. I mean, I've got a real sort of burning question as well, and even though I'm in and around this world, but not in the depth or any way or lived experience that you have, Romy. But you're so confident, you're so calm and collected, and at the same time, I didn't want to point it out, but you clearly got some tics going on. How do how do you maintain that? I mean, you're just incredible. How do you maintain that confidence level? And because it's almost like it's like they're not there. And we, I think, as viewers, we didn't even notice them after the first couple. How do you maintain that confidence?
I think the reason that I kind of seem like I don't notice the tics sometimes is just because I'm so used to it. I'm ticking almost all the time. Eventually, they become the background to me. So I might be ticking, but I'm just laser focused trying to ignore them. In terms of the confidence, I think that what's given me confidence above all else is actually just connecting to others in the Tourette's community. Because I did have a lot of negative experiences. I faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of mistreatment when I was younger, but that was the low self-esteem from that was able to be overcome by connecting with others in the community. Because that taught me to understand myself, and I have a lot of role models in the community. So that's something that gives you a lot of confidence, but also just pretending you're confident can kind of make you more confident as well.
I love that. Yeah, I've often been accused of faking it till I make it. That's absolutely wonderful, Romy, and I have watched your TED talk, which is just incredible as well.
Oh, thank you.
We have got a few questions coming in, which is brilliant. I think there's probably more questions that people want to ask. Stu's is asked us about when you
I'm a
compare
chicken
Tourette's
nugget.
with other neurological conditions. Do you feel the ticks coming on, and how much notice do you get? I think you might have said you possibly don't notice, but
Yeah.
do you notice ticks arriving?
I can sort of feel the urge of the ticks coming on. It's a physical sensation, really. For me, it's mainly a pressure in my chest. So that's why holding in ticks can feel like holding your breath. The notice, I would say I only get like a couple of seconds or so notice, but when I'm focused, I can kind of put that into the background and I don't notice it as much. It's only if I'm focusing on it, then I feel it more. So I only really get a few seconds notice as such. Um, Sometimes I know what I'm going to tick before I tick it because it comes in my head like an intrusive thought, and I'm just thinking, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that, and then my ticks obviously say it. I'm like, thanks. But I sometimes get noticed like that, yeah. But sadly, even though I get noticed, that doesn't mean I can always stop it.
Oh, it's wonderful. Peggy's also asked a question. She the threshold for diagnosis, which again is very I think rarely known, which is fantastic. You filled us in on that. So I was wondering how to know the difference with tics and stimming for autism with her son with ADHD. So is there where that fine line is drawn?
Yeah, that's interesting as well because I'm autistic as well. I stim as well as tick. So I would say stimming is done with more of a purpose. Stimming is done sort of to calm yourself, whereas ticks, they aren't really done to calm yourself. And interestingly, stimming is sometimes an expression of emotion. Like if I'm excited, I'll flap my hands and jump up and down. And although my ticks can get worse when I'm excited, they're not an expression of excitement in itself. Ticks are more distressing than stims to me, because ticks are more unwanted and uncomfortable, whereas stims kind of happen without me even thinking. But for the ticks, I get an urge before them. It's sometimes difficult to separate them, but overall, I do think the difference is that stimming is more calming. And as well, actually, I've noticed there's a very, 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 very wide range of ticks, and they often change over time a lot. But I've noticed that with stims, they don't seem to change as often. Like I've rocked back and forth my entire life, I've flapped my hands my entire life. Stimming appears to be, more of a few things that I know a lot of people have the same stims, is what I'm trying to say, and they don't seem to change as often. Um, but yeah, I think stims are more of a self-regulation technique. Ticks are more just something that comes up and you have the urge to do.
I'm gonna jump in before Steph's question, which is a much better question than mine, because you said that ticks change over time.
Hmm.
Do you have some ticks, and I guess they become familiar and part of your world. Do you have some ticks that have disappeared that I liked that one, or any from your childhood or anything?
I used to be known for saying cabbage and spinach a lot. I don't really tick that now. It's beans now, which isn't as fun. But yeah, the I used to be known for saying spinach, but that passed. It is very strange to me though that it can focus on one word for so long and then just suddenly change to something completely different. I'm like, okay, then guess that's over. It's very strange in that sense. I did go through a period when I was younger where I had the same sort of tick sequence thing for about 4 years. I had this tick where I would clap my hands, do that, hit myself. It was very ritualistic because it kind of feeds the OCD and it's very linked. But I would have that, and that would happen every day for about 4 years. That was it stuck quite well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Right, I'm going to go back to Steph's question now, which is much more important than mine. And Steph talked about, which was very sort of empathetic, actually. So sorry to hear about your bad experience. So she works in higher education, and your adjustments were really insightful. She'd be interesting to know what kind of support you've personally received in jobs or education, and whether or not that
Hmm.
was you had to ask for that, or maybe that was given freely.
Yeah. In school I got quite a lot of support because I my tics, they were very bad when I was a teenager, like extreme. So I had permission to use a laptop because I found writing difficult. Um, the school could tell that after I accidentally threw a pen at my maths teacher's crotch. That's like one of my core memories now. But yeah, I was given permission to use a laptop because my tics would just keep throwing my pens everywhere. I also had half days on some days because I had a lot of anxiety about going into school because there's a lot of uncertainty when you have Tourette's, and I was always thinking like, am I going to accidentally hit out at someone? Am I going to randomly fall to the ground? So the school thankfully were able to give me half days, some days, and that reduced the anxiety. And as well as that, there were quite a few things. I was allowed to leave class if I needed to. Hey, and I had a separate room for exams because can you imagine me in an exam hall? That wouldn't go down very well. And then when I was in college, I also had a separate room for exams in college as well as rest breaks. But interestingly, for my second year of college, I actually did it remotely. I did it from home, not just because of lockdown and everything, but because my tics exploded again at that point, and I realized that I didn't feel comfortable in class. So I was really lucky that they just said, you can do it remotely if you want. So I found that very helpful. And in terms of jobs, it was again, I did remote work for a while because I wasn't comfortable again going in places. I didn't want to accidentally throw something at someone or yell at people. So remote work was very helpful for me actually. Hello, woohoo! That was good. And thankfully, my employer at that time was very understanding because, ironically, I was working with a charity that helps people with tics. So it's not like they could not be understanding. I think the main thing at that time was remote working. And at a work placement I had before that, they were understanding as well, simply because they had a friend with Tourette's. So I think understanding is the most important thing. And I've learned to accommodate myself when I'm working on things in a way. So I've just learned what works for me. I've learned that if I'm ticking, I can go take a break and then come back to what I'm doing, make up the time and stuff. And things like I know when to use speech text or text to speech if I need to. Just that flexibility in knowing what I need at any given time.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer, and it's lovely that workplaces are accommodated. I know some aren't, as you pointed out as well. But Samantha's asked, do you is there any reasonable adjustments or accommodations that could be used for job applications or interviews? Maybe that you would have preferred a job interview to go down a different route, maybe.
Hmm. I'm not really an expert in job interviews because I haven't really had many interviews. But one of the challenges that people have is knowing whether to tell an employer they have Tourette's or not. That can be very difficult because I know a lot of people don't even know whether they should say it at the interview or whether they should wait till after, and that can lead to a lot of anxiety. I think, again, it depends on the individual. You'll have to ask the individual what would make them more comfortable. The most important thing would be understanding that they don't remember what they tick and things. But maybe stuff like doing an interview over the phone if necessary, if they are not able to travel, especially if it's like a remote job. And I think just the individual having the confidence and ability to explain, this is how this condition impacts me and this is the support I'll need. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Wonderful. Well, we have come to the end. You superbly filled that 10 minutes of questions, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look through the chat, but there's a lot of very sort of passionate people saying how incredible and articulate
No.
and informative
Oh,
this
thank you.
session has been, and it's actually been one of our more greatly attended sessions as well. So I think that's really important for this subject. And I imagine, Romy, we will be talking to you next year. I think we may well need to do a second one on this. I've just put in the chat again, Romy's amazing TEDx. I think if everyone could
Thank
check that out. What we'll do
you.
as well is when the email goes out, we'll put all of Romy's amazing social media links in
Thank you.
incredible YouTube channel that I think you should all go and check out. And please subscribe as well. So our next webinar is slightly earlier. It's the 13th of December. So it's Wednesday, the 13th of December. We're keeping the Christmas week free for everybody. So it's the 13th of December, and it's going to be Sarah Sweet Rowley, and she's going to be talking about autism and early years as well. So Romy, thank you so much. You're an incredible
Oh,
inspiration to us
thank
over
you.
here at Thrive, and I think to the world in general. And it's been
Thank
an
you.
absolute pleasure having you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a really good time here, and it's really, really good to meet you. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you as well. Thank you to everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day.